I'm sad. You've been out all night, know you've been bad.
Before I continue with this video series, I'd like to point out that my review of the historic records of the Clacker family shows me that they were a very hard-working family. I suspect they had a good handle on the importance of hard work and sacrifice for their families. It seems to me that Sister Charlotte was an exception, not the rule. As a matter of fact, in a later video, I intend to show some evidence that the Clacker family had no idea of what was going on with Sister Charlotte or the scam that she was pulling. Before we go much further, I'd also like to talk a little bit about Catholic cemeteries. We probably have some non-Catholics watching, and maybe they've noticed that Catholics almost exclusively get buried in Catholic cemeteries. And there's good reason for this. Catholics want to be buried in consecrated ground. Americans are probably familiar with the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. In that speech, Abraham Lincoln referred to the Gettysburg battlefield as being hallowed ground. Now, while the speech was beautiful, to a Catholic that would sound like a modernist heresy. That's because no amount of human effort can make something sacred. Only God can make things sacred. To think otherwise would be extremely presumptuous and prideful. With the wreckage in the wake of the Second Vatican Council in the 1970s, occasionally some Catholics do get buried in non-Catholic cemeteries, but this wasn't true in the years given in Sister Charlotte's timeline. Back then, Canon 1206 of the Code of Canon Law of 1917 was in effect. Canon 1206 stated that whenever possible, a Catholic should be buried in a Catholic cemetery. In Sister Charlotte's time, if a Catholic was buried in a non-Catholic cemetery, it would have been scandalous.
And so naturally, I grew up in that Roman Catholic home as a child, knowing only the catechism.
Sister Charlotte's father plays a prominent part in her testimony. She claims that until her father was in his 90s, he was a Catholic all his life because that was all he ever knew. Sister Charlotte then slanders her own father and says that when he was 93 years old, he became an apostate from the Catholic faith. However, he only lived to be 83 years of age. Also, he was never Catholic in the first place. Let's see what his parents were. William Henry Clacker's mother and Sister Charlotte's grandmother was named Rhoda Cackler. Presumably, Sister Charlotte was named after her. The first Rhoda Cackler was not Catholic, as evidenced by the fact that she's not buried in a Catholic cemetery. Unfortunately, at some time before 1899, Sister Charlotte's grandmother and grandfather had broken up. Here's the 1899 city directory from the city of Rock Island. The first Rhoda Cackler as being a widow. However, her husband was still alive. She must have called herself a widow either to hide the shame that her husband had left her, or perhaps her husband had just disappeared without any trace and was presumed dead. So what happened to George Cackler, Sister Charlotte's grandfather? Well, in 1905, he was baptized in the non-Trinitarian baptism as a Mormon. Incidentally, Sister Charlotte also promoted non-Trinitarian baptisms. That is, she promoted baptisms that weren't in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. George Cackler wasn't buried in the same cemetery as his wife Rhoda. He was buried apart from her in a Mormon cemetery. The Cacklers were a most definitely non-Catholic family. In her false testimony, Sister Charlotte mentions her Uncle John, and she really did have an Uncle John. He was her father's brother. Sister Charlotte slanders her uncle and says that when he was 67 years of age, he became an apostate to the Catholic Church. However, John W. Cackler died when he was only 66 years old.
I remember that particular day, two of the sisters came home with me from school. They were my teachers.
Sister Charlotte's false testimony claims that she went to a Catholic school. The question is, what Catholic school could she have possibly attended? On your screen, you see a map from the church history of St. Anne's Church in Hiawatha, Kansas. This map is the northeast section of Kansas, and it shows all the Catholic churches in that area. There really aren't that many because this is a sparsely populated area, which quite frankly wasn't a hotbed of Catholicism. You can see Hiawatha toward the top of the map in the middle. As you recall, in the year 1910, Sister Charlotte was living in Wolf River. This would have been the time where she claims that the nuns followed her home from school. The problem is that Wolf River was a tiny town. Though it could support a Catholic church, there was no school attached to it. The closest Catholic school to Sister Charlotte's house would have been in Seneca, Kansas. That was about 45 miles away from her home. We know Sister Charlotte was a good walker, but it would be hard to imagine that she had walked this distance twice a day just to get to and from school. It would have taken her quite a bit of time. However, Seneca was the closest Catholic school that existed in Kansas. Sister Charlotte instead could have found a closer Catholic school if she went up north and crossed over to the state line into Nebraska. There was a Catholic church in Falls City, Nebraska, which would have only been about 33.5 miles from her home in Wolf River. You may recall from a couple installments ago that just a little bit after that time, Sister Charlotte's family moved to Severance, Kansas. Did this make the trip shorter for Sister Charlotte? Could she have gotten closer to a Catholic school? No, actually it would have made the trip longer. As a matter of fact, Severance, Kansas didn't even have a Catholic church. Sister Charlotte kept making her father appear to be a very devout Catholic. However, would a devout Catholic have moved his family away from a town with a Catholic church to a town 8 miles away where there was no Catholic church? Now, he could have gone to church once a week on Sunday in a horse and buggy, and that would have taken him about an hour when the weather was perfect. But is this something such a devout Catholic would have done? Since this video was starting to run long, I decided to hold off with the information about Sister Charlotte's brothers and sisters. In the next installment, we'll come back and provide you with information how nobody in her family was ever Catholic. In the meantime, please pray for the church and please pray for the repose of Sister Charlotte's soul.